Welcome to Realizing Resilience, a podcast from the Connecticut Women's Consortium. We're not behavioral health professionals, but we're your gateway to real conversations with the experts. Each episode, we'll delve into the vast landscape of mental health, from personal stories to expert insights. Together, we'll bridge the gap between clinical expertise and personal experiences, connecting with diverse voices and perspectives. Join us for insightful conversations that demystify the world of mental health.
Sandrine Harris is a somatic, meaning body-centered, practitioner with a private practice focused in learning about ourselves through multiple pathways, including bodily sensation and healing trauma and chronic pain. She is a somatic experiencing practitioner, a Feldenkrais practitioner, an embodied self-learning process, and a community mindfulness facilitator offering pathways for integrating lived experience to support renewed connection, vitality, and resilience. A former professional dancer, Sandrine also co-creates experiences that celebrate creativity, playfulness, and our belonging within the natural world. Her process is collectively named Emergent Nature. She is based on unceded Stockbridge Munsee Mohican land in western Massachusetts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Realizing Resilience. I'm Marisa.
And I'm Alana.
And today we have the pleasure of being able to speak with Sandrine Harris. So hello, Sandrine. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello. Thank you both. I'm happy to be here.
So to kick off this conversation, do you think you can explain to us what somatic healing is, since you are kind of like a somatic practitioner, a body-centered practitioner? Can you kind of go into what somatic healing even is?
Yes, thank you. We'll begin with the word somatic, which is referring to the body, of, with, and through the body. Somatics is about directing our attention into sensation or lack of sensation, if the case may be, the connection between our mind states and emotions and body states, and what we can learn from all of this in growing our awareness to continue healing. Somatic healing is a lasting experience, most importantly, because we're working directly with our body's wisdom and capacity, little by little and over time, in deepening connection with ourselves. And this is through a combination of kind witnessing of what's showing up in us. For example, a pattern of anxiety, applications from research on the mind-body connection, and most importantly, experiential skill building that involves our bodies directly. Sometimes it feels like everything we're going through is all up in our heads, in our minds. Like when we notice ourselves with a narrow focus following a weird interaction with someone, and then we're cyclically revisiting that in our minds. And we can always remember that our bodies are having an experience as well of what we're moving through. So it's not all happening upstairs. Though we may experience it that way, there is a whole cascade of other experiences that are also happening in us through our bodies. And it may change our digestion. It may change the way that we're using our eyes. It may bring us into distraction, for example, or uncomfortable sensation in the body. So somatic healing is working with all of this together. And in a formalized structure of somatic healing, there are several pathways. One of them is through individual session work with a practitioner, such as myself, supporting and also in a collaborative process together. And another way is in a group setting, in a workshop or a training, where there's experiential support and learning for each person individually and within the collective. So we're all learning from and being with each other in our experiences. With trauma, traumatic stress, and chronic pain syndromes, which are all the focus of my work through somatic healing, and in particular through somatic experiencing, which is one of the primary modalities I work through. And that's developed by the psychotherapist, body worker, and trauma healing pioneer, Peter Levine. Somatic experiencing is working with this so-called bottom-up processing to become aware of, relate with, and transform our adverse or uncomfortable experiences, including stress patterns, which we all have, inclusive of our bodies. When we remember that trauma is not the event or the absence of what wasn't present, in the case of, for example, childhood neglect, trauma is what happens in us that we're experiencing still now, and has specific hallmarks different to each of us that may include intrusive thoughts, an intense desire to disconnect from others, nightmares, and much more. These are just a few examples. In body states, there may be, for example, a quality of collapse in a person's body. And underneath that collapse is a lot of physical tension. And all of these qualities have thought patterns and emotions connected to them. In the process of somatic experiencing, we begin noticing with kindness and curiosity to start with. And then there are, of course, specific ways that we work with what we're noticing. Some somatic healing is more movement oriented and less verbal or talk based. And other approaches, which is the way that I work, is a combination of combining talking, body sensing, slowing down, noticing movement and gesture that arises organically, and becoming conscious of support and connection from inside of ourselves, within our collaboration of feeling seen and heard and witnessed compassionately, and within our environment. So the approach isn't you are showing up like this, so I tell you as the practitioner what you should do in your body and mind. The way that we interact is collaborative and invitational. For example, when I notice something showing up unconsciously in someone's body, I may invite a pause and a deeper noticing of a quality where the words and the bodily expression feel in some way disconnected. And that might be, for example, where someone is shaking their head no, but they are offering an affirmative statement, like, I'm doing well today, and the head is shaking no, right? Then we have something to grab onto, to notice together, and to investigate. Somatics always includes becoming aware of the environment we're inhabiting as well. So it's not only what we're noticing inside of ourselves, but our relationship with others, including the natural world we belong to and animals that might be in our lives or that we interact with, and our immediate environments, since all of these parts contribute to our whole human experience. For example, if I'm someone suffering from chronic insomnia, lack of sleep or poor sleep, my relationship with my physical bed and sleeping room is likely altered in some way. And I may experience anxiety, resistance, and other behaviors when spending time in that room with my bedtime approaching, or even thinking about that room at another time in my day. This is all happening in my body as a discomfort and a quality of energy that may be from exhaustion or nervousness. And all of this changes then how I sense myself. For example, I may grow a belief that I'll never be able to sleep soundly again. And that belief started in my body before I developed a pattern of thoughts related to my ability to sleep or to not sleep soundly. We carry so many layers and levels of lived experience into the now, and including intergenerational patterns of lived experience, which we now know impact genetic expression and other markers for our well-being. And somatic healing gives us a pathway to heal the parts of how we embody our lives, whether it's recent or long held in us, conscious or unconscious. In working with the body as the foundation of understanding ourselves deeply, we can bring more sense of choice, capacity to feel connected with others, and energy for living our lives. For me, one of the most interesting aspects of somatic healing is that we don't need to know all of the details or recount and track all of what we have lived or are living right now in order to heal. Sometimes tracing back and talking through what we've lived could be re-traumatizing. And for some of us, there also isn't a distinct memory that's even available for us to be with. Our bodies remember, and that's how we can heal what's here now. We can't change what has happened to us, but we can change the impacts in the present. And this is gradual. It takes time, little by little, to have lasting sticking power in our whole mind-body system. I find somatic healing to be a tender process where we're organically learning to be with ourselves, including using our imagination, bravely moving towards transforming deeply held patterns through no fault of our own. Right? When those patterns are here, it is dependent upon our lived experience, and they can feel permanent in us. We have the capacity to learn new patterning throughout our lifetimes, which is a lot of what somatic healing supports. And this is also supported by research, including in the field of neuroplasticity, that we can change the neural circuitry in our brains throughout our lives. There's something called experience-dependent neuroplasticity, which shapes how our brains and our whole nervous systems and bodies navigate life. So there's a real potency to somatic healing to grow adaptability and vitality.
You're touching on it when you talk about like neuroplasticity. And I think it's interesting because in some ways we do see things as kind of intrinsically linked between mental and physical health and the world around us. And then in some ways it's kind of perceived as not at all interconnected. But obviously there's these more kind of like mainstream accepted formats now, and even things like EMDR becoming more recognized as being like an evidence-based and legitimate practice. But what kind of misconceptions do you think people still have when it comes to holistic healing?
That's a great question. What I notice is that there can be a quality of binary thinking, this or that we have to choose between clinical or traditional care models and something holistic. Holistic care frameworks are complementary to any approach or protocol we're following, including medications, surgeries, and more. The very idea of holistic is caring for our whole human organism. There's a way for traditional clinical approaches and holistic pathways to be harmoniously supporting us. And we need to consider the source, right? Always. To be mindful of what and who we're being influenced by, or in believing any one system or way is the absolute authority for our individual healing. When we think about the levels and the layers I mentioned before, we remember that, for example, surgery is not just a medical procedure to change structure in our bodies. There are emotions, thoughts, and energies in us that are connected to having that procedure and the reason for the procedure. And some of these may include natural anxiety for the outcome, unexpected post-surgical bodily sensations, and other experiences we're having. And all of this impacts us, each in different ways. Just like two people who experience the same event may not be impacted in the same way on an individual level. I have an example to share from my own life, if I may. So thinking about this, the holistic versus the modern medical frameworks, I had a traumatic accident a few years ago, and one of the physical parts of the accident was a severe bone break. I was fortunate to receive all of the needed medical care, including physical therapy for an extended period. And more than a year after my bone had healed and I was generally feeling better, I had lingering symptoms that challenged my feeling of okayness on a daily basis. I was lucky to come across and later train in a specific somatic intervention for my symptoms that comes from the work of medical doctor and pain researcher Howard Schubiner. And he specializes in working with non-structural pain syndromes, meaning that after all of the needed tests and scans are done, symptoms are still present without a known cause, such as persistent migrating pain throughout the body. And in my case, the sudden onset of head spins and nausea I was experiencing on a daily basis, which was not fun, in a specific circumstance, which had to do with going downstairs, which is an essential everyday movement for me in my home, needed additional support. I wasn't able to figure out what was going on or how to resolve what was happening. And so even with all of the medical care I was fortunate to receive, I needed additional support to transform what was lingering after all of my known injuries had already healed. And this involved tuning into my symptoms differently and relearning a sense of internal safety in my body while releasing the fear that was bound up in my system and promoted by neural pathways in my brain that were essentially misfiring, telling me that I was in danger long after the danger was gone. And this is an example of what can happen within us as a result of traumatic experience. There's an altered sense of myself that needs specific support to shift. And over time, I was fortunately able to resolve these lingering effects of my accident through this additional pathway. That's an example of how multiple approaches can be complementary to each other for our healing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great that you have your own personal example because it definitely makes it more tangible, more real, I guess, to others who are experiencing it, with you, whether you're their practitioner or just talking to them about it. You're not the only person who's experienced something like this. It's good to have, not that I wish that you broke your arm, but it's good to have a personal experience.
Absolutely. That's everything that I share with others is because I have experienced shifts in myself that have changed my life. And that's a good thing. The lived experience that we all carry into how we support others, whether it be in friendship or in any setting and situation, can always in some way help us grow our understanding of ourselves and also of whoever we're with.
I think it's really fascinating because this exists obviously in kind of like large scale events, like if someone has cancer or a really kind of devastating illness or accident, but it exists kind of on this micro level too, where it's like even if you have a cold and you get to miss out on something or you have to miss out on something, there's still kind of this emotional effect and like reverberation that happens from even just kind of like minor shifts in your physical or emotional being.
Yes, and they can very often be tied to bigger patterns underneath our belief systems about ourselves or about our ability or whatever it might be. Absolutely.
I broke my ankle roller skating, which was like the only thing that was keeping me active and joyful during COVID. So I broke it in May 2020 and then couldn't do anything indoors because of COVID. And then had kind of lost the one thing that was keeping me outdoors and upbeat and waking up early. And it didn't realize until too late. And it sounds so silly, like how devastating that was for me in the moment and how just knowing that I was going to have mental effects from that physical experience would have helped me so much in that time. And like I figured it out now and I'm recovered and the world is very different, but it was something where it just seemed so obvious after the fact that like obviously that would have impacted other parts of my life than just not being able to walk for a little while.
Mm-hmm. Yes, how we meet the mind, the body, and the heart, our emotions and our mood matters.
I was thinking of how you had said that you like sharing personal experiences with when you're doing trainings or educating people. You've done, trainings and things of that nature within colleges and clinical settings as well as private or like group settings. Do you ever experience pushback or skeptics from people in these settings for holistic practices?
The short answer to that is yes. We all embody learning and openness to different perspectives through the lenses that shape us. Our embodiment is formed through many factors, including systemic oppression, which includes racism, genderism, ableism, among several others, and our early experiences with caregivers and in our family system, the culture we grow up in, and the culture we live in as adults, the educational models that are resonant for us or that we've been exposed to already, the institutions we interact with. All of this is a part of how we approach learning and healing. Getting curious feels to me like the best starting place. And when resistance or doubt is showing up, for example, we can notice that and start there. And different pathways are resonant for each of us. I welcome skepticism and pushbacks in learning environments I'm a part of because it helps me grow, think differently, and broaden how I'm approaching what we're looking at together. And if I'm guiding a learning experience, the first thing I do is slow down to be with what's showing up in the room. And I weave in interesting research from body psychotherapy, neuroscience, and other areas to support how specialized fields are looking at what we're talking about. So it's not just my voice and my perspective, and especially because I'm not a clinician. So at the end of the day, what is useful is what expands our capacity to sense our aliveness and have a positive experience of being human. Part of our neurobiological resiliency depends on our curiosity. Resiliency in this context, I'm talking about adaptability in our whole organism and capacity to keep moving with life instead of living in a state of overwhelm from trauma or other life challenges, which is, by the way, not our fault if that's a part of our reality. And it does impact how we stay present and enjoy life. So our neurobiological resiliency is nurtured by experiencing connection, feeling seen and heard, rest. There are many ways for us to integrate learning and also participate in the process of learning with others. So if we step back, we can take in more and then decide what's resonant or helpful from any perspective we're exposed to and integrate what we're learning over time.
It sounds kind of like your advice to anyone who's looking to learn more or get into it is to sort of learn as much as you can from different perspectives and sort of synthesize them to figure out what works for you. And on that note, if sharing information is helpful, but then at some point, I think you mentioned earlier how you can't kind of consider one person to be the authority. At some point, I think it can become misinformation depending on how things are shared and how social media works. And so what would you say people should keep in mind when they're learning about somatic healing?
Yes, my greatest concern about, for example, short posts or videos on social media about, I'll take the area where I work, which is trauma and healing trauma, is decontextualization. When we read something or see something in short edited formats, we're not necessarily receiving the context and the root system for that information or potential educational information and how it intersects with our individual life and body. And most importantly, we may grab onto it through our own interpretation and miss what isn't being offered up in that particular post that also needs to be considered as a part of the whole. Healing needs context. An example of this from somatic healing specifically is a current trend in posts on social media about quote unquote shaking, like a trembling movement through the body. That trauma is held in the body and we can shake our bodies physically and release trauma, is what some of these posts are sharing. And there is a lot more support. that is needed to bolster our systems than a physical shaking or bouncing movement, which, by the way, is potentially not a good idea for some folks. And so this quote unquote shaking trend is extracted from a much larger process to nurture the deep healing that's needed for integrating traumatic experience. My suggestion is to consider the source of what you're taking in and remember that there's always a much larger context related to what's being shared, whether that is named or not named by the person or the organization that is sharing that post. And when something stops you in your tracks and really lands for you, for example, a quote shared, that happened to me yesterday morning, right? And I took the whole day to metabolize it and really appreciated reading that quote. It's an invitation to go deeper. It's not the whole thing, it's an invitation for us to notice and to begin understanding why and how something is landing for us. When something lights up in us, we can start to get more curious. And the other piece, which I can't stress enough, is that with somatic healing, it needs to be lived. So there's no formulaic A plus B equals C. There's no 3 easy steps to healing trauma roadmap. I get this all the time when folks who are frustrated, understandably, come to me for support and share that they've read a bunch of books or listened to a bunch of podcasts, and they're not noticing a quality of change in themselves that they are desiring. So all of this information flow inward is good. And of course, it can greatly support our learning. And the holistic model is based in real-time processing, integrating, and living a transformation of how we sense ourselves. And that takes a specific kind of support that extends beyond those inputs. So the things that I like to remember when I'm taking in social media or bite-sized morsels is that I can slow myself down, tune into my experience, notice how things are landing, and remember that healing is always possible. We can't change what has happened to us, but we can change how we experience our lives, and it takes time to create lasting change.
What a beautiful way to end that. Yeah, I think definitely also acknowledging that healing isn't linear is also helpful too, and that because it's not linear, it often seems impossible, but there's always, after every hill is a valley. So yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you. And I love this idea of nonlinear, or what I call spiralic, or the spiral. An example of this, because folks ask me often what I mean by nonlinear, is grief. We can experience, for example, after the loss, let's say, of a person in our lives, 20 years later, we can experience an upwelling of grief. So we're always in this continuum of sensing and learning and healing throughout our lifetimes. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for talking with us today and taking the time.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Links will be in the description to keep up with us at the Connecticut Women's Consortium and to learn more about Sandrine and her work. Thank you for joining us today, and see you next time.